People remember endings and they remember beginnings.
That's Robert Glazer, the founder and chairman of the board of Acceleration Partners, a global leader in partnership marketing. He's also co-founded and chaired BrandCycle. Robert is a serial entrepreneur and an award-winning executive. He's also a #1 Wall Street Journal and USA Today author. His books include Elevate, Friday Forward, Elevate Your Team, and How to Thrive in the Virtual Workplace. You are listening to Dear Human Resources, and I'm your host, Marilyn Germain. In this episode, Robert is going to tell us why we should break up with a 2 weeks notice. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Marie.
Our podcast show reaches listeners from around the world. So let's give some context to our topic here. Robert, can you explain what's commonly meant by the phrase 2 weeks notice?
2 weeks notice it's a movie. It's kind of a US phrase, and we operate in an employment at will concept here, meaning that anyone can leave at any time, but it's historically been considered sort of respectful for the employee to give sort of 2 weeks notice. But I've just found that this whole and the problem is the same even in places where you have statutory requirements, and that is that like we're ending work relationships more like a breakup, a sudden breakup in a personal relationship than we are kind of like a sports contract where you sign for a period of time and it kind of ends, and then you decide whether you want to carry it forward. And I'd argue that it hasn't kept up with the changing nature of our workplace, which is the assumption that people are not going to work for us forever. You know, even in great companies, maybe 24 to 32 months is the average. And I think this practice is sort of outdated, disruptive, and it's negatively impacting both employees and employers.
Right. And to add to what you just said, Robert, about the meaning of the 2 weeks notice is we need to put it in the American context. Here in this country, we don't have contracts that allow an employee to have a safety of a job, right? So the at-will notice that you mentioned, that means that an employer can get rid of an employee without any specific notice, and vice versa.
Vice versa. Yeah, everyone pretends like it's one way, but in other countries, it's both ways. You can't leave. You know, in the US, our culture, like that would be considered sort of like indentured servitude, right? So we wouldn't like that. But in places, they can force you to work there for 3 months more, and then you also can't leave for 3 months. So there are some uniquely American things about that culture. But I would argue what we're talking about, no matter how much time there is the sort of surprise departure and how someone leaves. And that's the thing I think we need to change.
Well, and quite frankly, many employees and employers sometimes don't even give 2 weeks notice. They say, hey, pick up your stuff and leave. Or you don't show up to work the next day. Yeah.
Or they don't show up to work the day they're supposed to start. So there's a lot of disrespect kind of going on out there.
All right. So let's focus on the 2 weeks notice. What's wrong with it? Let's first focus on employees. What are some typical consequences for employees who decide to leave a company without open communication about their intention of leaving?
This is a little more latent and not as obvious. It may be now in a more difficult job economy, but we've had a Goldilocks 10 or 15 years where people could leave jobs, you know, however they wanted, go on to the next one, burn the bridges, and there really wasn't a lot of repercussion. So even if you did a great job as a company, if you leave poorly, if your boss didn't, you know, really like how you did it and felt you kind of left them high and dry and weren't honest, that person or people out there, when you need a new job and job markets are tough, they're not a reference you can use. And I would argue that smart companies are back channel referencing these days. So you might have some people out there that are actively impeding with your career that you don't even realize based on how you left your last job. I mean, people can map it out. They see your last company. They call their friend, you know, Frank, and Frank's like, oh yeah, Sally worked here. Yeah. You know, she was great, but she left really abruptly. I mean, people remember endings and they remember beginnings. So I think you could create a little bit of an invisible barrier to your career by leaving jobs poorly.
Yeah, good point. What about employers? What is the impact for them when an employee turns in their 2 weeks notice?
Yeah, this one's a little more straightforward. Look, if you ever had a team and someone obviously thinks 2 weeks notice is fair and respectful, you're like, what do you mean? Like, I can't even get a job rec out for 2 weeks. It's going to be months, before I can fill this. There's client management, there's risk. The rest of the team is stressed. So, losing people when things are busy and tight and you don't have slack in the system, like everyone feels that. So I come from the professional services world, and I would say it's a huge risk in the business model of a services business. One of the number one things that clients hate who are customers of service business is when their account manager or rep kind of turns over suddenly, and it usually puts the account at risk. So particularly for those companies, that becomes a real problem for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a productivity issue, right? Someone's not doing work anymore, and the others, as you said, they have to pick up the slack. And it may take some time to rehire someone, and rehiring someone costs money. I mean, they have to advertise the position, and it takes about 6 months to
Right.
train someone to be fully productive.
Pick a service here, whether it's an interior decorator you've worked with, or an accounting firm, or your tax firm, or something like that. And you've worked with someone for a while, and someone gets on a call and tells you, "Hey, sorry, this is my last call, and you're now going to be working with Jane." Well, you don't know Jane from a hole in the wall, and so at this point, like, going to a different firm is as big of a risk as sort of working with Jane. Now let's fast forward and imagine, like, we'll get into this more, I'm sure, but we had an open transition, and the company had more time to figure this out. Well, what would happen is Steve would come in, or Jane would come into the call with me and start showing up on the first couple calls with the client, and start to earn the trust, start to take over those calls in the relationship. And then a couple of months later, I'd say, "Oh, I'm actually going to be leaving, and Jane, and she's going to take over." And we've had a warm handover, not a cold handover. These 2 week notices in services businesses caught us a lot of these cold handovers that really put the relationship in jeopardy.
All right, you said open transition.
Yeah.
What's an open transition program?
The Open Transition Program is really a playbook designed to create a better exit experience through transparency, mutual respect, and aligned interests. What you're trying to do is say, look, when we think that maybe it's time for a change here, or you think that's time for a change, we're okay with you working here. And there's a transition point. You can continue to do your current job, and we'll begin the process of helping you. I mean, that's one outcome of it. The other outcome is to have the types of psychological safety and open conversations so that you can fix some of these problems before it happens. But it's the notion of removing, like in car insurance, we have sort of fault, right? Like it's your fault or it's my fault. And this sort of removes that to a model that is more about just trying to get to a good outcome.
Can you give us some examples of the effectiveness of such an open transition program?
Yeah. So, I mean, we implemented this at our company years ago. And so we would have people all the time who are moving on to new jobs, maybe because we started a discussion around, hey, this isn't a fit, or otherwise, or because they started it because we had those four elements: psychological safety, open communication, mutual respect, and commitment to a mutually beneficial outcome. We're saying, look, leaving here is not a death sentence. That's fine. People do it. Let's talk about it, and let's have a transition period that works for both of us. It just really changes this whole notion about this concept of leaving as a personal breakup versus in sports. There's a lot of people playing out their contract, and everyone knows they're going to go to a different team afterwards, and there's no animosity, and it works, and they keep playing on the team. And so that's the goal of these programs, is to really change the whole narrative about how people leave.
So you said there are four fundamental principles that are
Yeah.
essential for creating an effective open transition program. What are those four principles?
Yeah, and these probably go in hierarchical order. So you need psychological safety in your organization. You need frequent one-to-one meetings, feedback loops, encourage trust and open dialogue. So people start talking about a lot of problems are fixable early if you know about them. Otherwise, they go on forever and they become toxic. So the open communication, this is the regular check-ins, town halls, anonymous feedback, transparent conversations about goals and transitions. Again, we're talking about these things like, hey, I'm not sure this sales job might be right for me. Oh, okay, let's talk about that. What is that? What might that look like? And the last two are, we're going to have mutual respect. We're going to address performance and exit discussions empathetically. We're going to focus on behavior, not character. And we're going to try to get to mutually beneficial outcomes. Like a good outcome is a thing where, something's not working out and that person leaves over a period that they feel good about and they feel supported and the business gets to get the person that they want in there. And look, these things aren't perfect, but the goal is to really get a good outcome. There's a phenomenon that happens. I'm a big sort of student of cognitive dissonance, and I think it's so overarching in everything we do where, I'll have someone on my team, let's say it's Sarah, and let's say it's sales, because Sarah's been at 50% of quota for like 4 quarters in a row now. And so it's obvious it's not working. I really like Sarah. So one of two things can happen. Cognitive dissonance says our brain can't handle these two different things, which is I like Sarah and Sarah's not good at her job. So what kind of happens, I think, in most cases is I know I have to move on from Sarah. So I start to make Sarah a bad person in my mind because it makes it easier for me to do a bad thing. So she makes a mistake. See, this is why we can't trust Sarah in this. And I'm just setting it up, even though I like Sarah, to make her out a bad person and fire her and have it be very antagonistic. I'm sort of encouraging the opposite, which is we have that relationship. It doesn't mean we have to ignore reality. So I'd sit down with Sarah and be like, Sarah, I love you, but like you and I both know that 50%, of quota is just not going to cut it. We can't keep going on. Like, do you like sales? Is this working? Like, what can we help you look at something else? Do you want to shift to marketing? And lean into that sort of relationship where Sarah feels like she kind of knows I can't let her go on in this forever, but I'm trying to help Sarah and I'm trying to help Sarah. I know she can't be on my sales team, but get to a good outcome either inside the company or outside the company and caring about her as a person. And I think we need more of that and less of the former.
You say that an open transition program fosters a culture of transparency and trust. I think from your explanation, I get the gist of it, but can you explain again how transparency and trust is really captured?
Do you have a different problem? If people are just nice to employees, but everyone underperforms and there's no differentiation, people struggle with that as well. So if people can trust that they can have difficult conversations, they can also trust that the company is going to kind of address issues, then you have this opportunity for better outcomes through real conversations. You can fix problems, you can figure out what's going on, you can identify or help the person work towards something different, either in your organization or outside. But you have to have that trust in order to willing to be. If I think that I even bring up the fact that the job's not working out well and I do something else and that I'm going to be walked to the door, of course I'm not going to have that conversation because I'm worried about my family and my paycheck. And so I'm going to continue to lie and have doctor's appointments and, do what I've been sort of trained to do.
So, for the HR professionals who are listening to this podcast, who may be interested in implementing an open transition program in their organization, what steps do you recommend they take?
Yeah. I obviously published this book and on my Substack, you can get the first 3 chapters. You can just download for free in terms of understanding if they want to do it. But first, I think there's some baseline, where is the organization today on its culture and its psychological safety? I would not go in terms of a program like this, trying to put it on top of a bad culture. You need a culture where some of these things exist. So that would be the first step, is to sort of improve the culture. And then there's a framework in this to think about how do we address problems early? How do we decide whether they're fixable, whether they're not fixable? Implement this program, communicate it, and then there's kind of a 7-step process of how to have people leave better if that is the outcome. It's not always the outcome. And so that's kind of outlined in there too. And that's having a written plan, setting a clear timetable, maintaining clear communication, opening a Rolodex to help the people, providing internal resources where you can to help the people, because you might have your own HR team that can do career coaching or resume help or facilitate roles, offer third party support, and then kind of make it personal where you can. And so there's a lot more detail in the book, but those are the kind of 7 steps about how you would implement a program like this. And it just starts. I've heard a lot of objections to these programs. Most of the objections for people who have never tried them. Before I had this book and I used to talk about this and I had a, talk around it and a TED talk around it, people would like just hear it generally and they're like, I'm going to try this. Like, this sounds better than what I'm doing. And I would say most people who have made some attempt at a real and open conversation rather than a conversation that ends up with someone being surprised in their job ending have felt that the outcomes are much better.
I can understand why. So remind us the title of your book and how can people get the first 3 chapters?
Sure. It's Rethinking 2 Weeks Notice. And they can go to robertglazer.com and click on, you have to click on my newsletter. It'll take you to my Substack, which is called Friday Forward. And then there's a tab there and you can just start reading the book right there.
Thanks for your valuable insights, Robert. It was fantastic having you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Support for this show comes from Western Carolina University, a campus of the University of North Carolina system, with the technical assistance of Kelly Minnis.